Thank you very much for this very kind introduction, and thank you very much for having me here today. I was asked by the organizers how many slides I have, given that I have 30 minutes, and I said I only have 640, but I'll be through my slides in about 3 hours and 40 minutes. And then they said we only have 30 minutes. So I can do two things, I thought. Either I can show 640 slides in one movie, or I can actually reduce my slides. And I did the latter, and so I'll give you a slight overview of what big data is. It's a lot more, of course, to cover, but here you have it. There is a book out if you want to hear the rest or read the rest. It's called Big Data, and it is available in 20 languages. So with that, let's get started, as we have only 30 minutes, 29 in fact. Every year, the winter flu kills tens of thousands of people around the world. But in the year 2009, you may remember, a new flu virus was discovered, the H1N1 virus, and experts feared that it might kill tens of millions. At that time, there was no vaccine available, and so the best that health authorities around the world could do was to slow the spread of the virus. But to do that, they needed to know where the virus was. In the United States, the Centers for Disease Control in Atlanta have doctors report every single new flu case to them. But collecting the data and analyzing it takes time. So the Centers for Disease Control picture of the flu crisis was always about 2 weeks behind, which is an eternity when you have a potentially deadly pandemic underway. Around the same time, engineers at Google developed an alternative way to predict the spread of the flu, not just nationally, but down to regions and even cities in the United States. Their idea was to use Google searches. Google handles more than 3 billion searches every single day and saves all of them. So Google took 50 million of the most common words that Americans use when they search on Google and compared where and when these words were searched for with flu data going back 5 years. The idea was to predict the spread of the flu through internet searches alone. And they struck gold. They struck gold. After crunching through almost 500 million mathematical models, Google identified 45 search words that predicted the spread of the flu with a high degree of accuracy. Here you see the official CDC data and the Google prediction data superimposed on it. But where the CDC had a 2-week time lag reporting, Google could spot the spread of the flu almost in real time. Strikingly, Google's method does not involve distributing mouth swabs or contacting physicians' offices. Instead, it's built on big data. That is the ability to harness data and large amounts of it to produce novel insights or to create valuable goods and services that would not have been possible with small data. That trend started about 15 years ago in the hard sciences. Take astronomy, for example. When the Sloan Digital Sky Survey telescope began operations in the year 2000, that telescope gathered more data in the first few weeks of operation than had been amassed in the entire history of astronomy. Over the past 10 years, that telescope collected 140 terabytes of data. But a successor telescope, here you see a rendering, due to come online in 2016, will acquire that amount of data, 140 terabytes, every 5 days. Or take biotechnology. Take the human genome, the DNA. In April this year, we celebrated the 10-year anniversary of the first successful sequencing of a human DNA. That human genome project took 10 years to complete, from 1993 to 2003. It costed $1 billion, and it took a global effort. Today, sequencing my DNA takes about 2 to 3 days, costs about $2,000 to $3,000. And that results in the 3 billion base pairs of my human genome to be completely sequenced. But not only the hard sciences are inundated with data. Internet companies, too, are drowning in data. Twitter messages exceed 400 million a day. YouTube has more than 800 million monthly users who upload an hour of video every single second. On Facebook, over 10 million photos are uploaded every hour. And Google processes a petabyte of data every single day. Petabyte of data? How much is that? Well, that's about the entire data, the entire quantity of all printed material in the largest library of the world, the US Library of Congress, 100 times over. Now, if you look at this from a macro perspective, what you see over time is a dramatic increase in the amount of information, the amount of data that we have out in the world. When you look at 1987, we had about 2.6 billion gigabytes of data. 20 years later, in 2007, we had close to 300 billion gigabytes. That's a 100 times increase over 20 years, a 100x increase. Now, when we go back in human history to find the last similar increase in the amount of data over a short period of time, we have to go back relatively far to 1450 to 1503, where, according to the measurements of Elizabeth Eisenstein, in 50 years, the amount of data in the world through Gutenberg's printing press doubled. So over 50 years, the amount of data doubled. Over 20 years, in the last 20 years, the amount of data increased by 100 times. Doubling created the Gutenberg revolution. What will 100 times increase produce? But that's only part of the story. The other part of the story is signified by the different colors that you see on this diagram. In 1987, all of it, almost all of it, was analog. In fact, in the year 2000, which is the second vertical white line that you see, in the year 2000, which is not so long ago, I remember the year 2000, 3/4 of the information in the world, the data that we had stored, was analog. Only 1/4 was digital. In the year 2013, this year, less than 1% of the data in the world will be analog. The rest will be digital. So what we are looking at is a real paradigm shift in how we make sense of the world. Much like in this old edging, we as human beings look outside of our current paradigm, of our current worldview, and spy into a new world. It is because the quantity and the increase in quantity leads to a new quality. In a way, it is like this. Think of photographs. If you take a picture of a horse, then that's a picture of a horse. If you take a picture of a horse every 10 seconds, it's still a picture of a horse every 10 seconds. But suppose you take 10 pictures of a horse a second, and then you look at them in fast speed, what you see is a movie. The increase in quantity of the information that you have has suddenly led to a new quality of information. It's not a photograph anymore, it moves. So with respect to big data, it's not about the sheer volume. It's about what the volume does to our understanding of the world. There are three shifts at the heart of the big data revolution. We call them more, messy, and correlations. So let's step through them. First, more. More means that we can collect and analyze far more data relative to a particular problem or a phenomenon or a question that we want to answer than ever we were able to do before when we were limited to working with just small samples of data. That way, we can let the data speak, and that often reveals insights that we never would have thought of. What is a way to exemplify, to symbolize that? Well, think of a photograph. If I take a photograph of my audience now, I would have to select who I'm focusing on. I might select on you, Mrs. Rector, and then in the photograph you are sharp. But the background might be blurred, because that's what you have to do when you select the photograph and when you take a picture. I'm showing you a photograph where I took a picture and focused on a toothbrush. In the background, but blurred, is my 3-year-old son. I needed to make a choice at the moment of taking the photograph, that is, of collecting the data, what details I was interested in, the toothbrush, and what details I was not interested in, my son. After I had collected the data, I could not go to different details because my son was blurry. I couldn't make him sharp. I couldn't put him back in focus. Now suppose we could do that. In fact, we can. There is a big data camera out there. It's called a light field camera. It's a new invention. The commercial name is called a Litro. And if you take a Litro picture, it takes all the light rays of all focal planes. So once you take the picture, you can then focus on something else in the picture after you have taken the picture, because all details are stored. So take this picture. This is a light field picture, and let me just click on my son here. And then my son goes into focus, and the toothbrush out of focus. That is possible because the picture includes all of the data. Think of that as a metaphor for big data. If you have captured everything about a particular question, you can zoom in and out of details after you have selected and gathered the data rather than before, which is a huge advantage because sometimes you don't know what you want to focus on at the time you collect the data. The second quality is messiness. That is, looking at vastly more data permits us to loosen up our desire for exactitude. In the old days, the small data days, we only had small amounts of data. If you only collect 10 data points, if you get 3 of them wrong, you're doomed. Your study is bad because your results will be off. That's why all of the researchers in academia are told, be extremely careful as you collect your data. Collect it at the highest possible quality. Because if you only have a few data points, you need to get them exactly. But what if you have 10 billion data points? Getting 1,000 of them wrong doesn't matter so much anymore. It's not that we give up on exactitude entirely. We only give up our singular devotion to it. What we lose in accuracy at the micro level, we gain in insight at the macro level. More and messy together let us lead to a third quality, and that is what we call correlations. Correlations let us, instead of asking why things are happening, of looking for causal relationships, ask what is happening. Now, why would that be interesting? Well, As human beings, we are conditioned to see the world as a series of causes and effects. That makes the world comprehensible. It's comforting. It's reassuring. And oftentimes, it's just plain wrong. Think about it this way. When I go out to a restaurant in Oxford, a restaurant that I hadn't tested before, and have dinner, and the next day my stomach is upset, I think immediately that it must have been the food that I ate at the restaurant. Even though statistically speaking, it is far more likely that I got the stomach bugs from shaking hands with some of the colleagues. My brain makes a causal connection between an effect, my stomach bug, and the potential cause, the restaurant, the food. But that causal connection is oftentimes incorrect. Finding out true causes is actually incredibly hard for scientists to do. Fortunately, with big data, we have an alternative available. That alternative is correlations. Instead of looking for causal relationships, we can look for uncovering connections and associations in the data that exist between the variables that might not otherwise have known. They don't tell us why things are happening. They only tell us what is happening. But in many ways, and in many contexts, that's good enough. Let me give you one example that you might not have suspected. It has to do with human beings that are particularly vulnerable. I'm talking about premature babies. Premature babies are particularly vulnerable to infections. The problem is that oftentimes you know that a baby has an infection too late to give medication, and so the baby dies. So you need to find out when a baby has an infection very early on. But oftentimes you just can't do that. So Dr. Carolyn McGregor at the University of Toronto had a new idea. She wanted to use big data to help those premature babies. She put sensors that measure the vital signs of the baby on the baby. And these sensors measure things like heart rate, blood oxygenation level, EKG, blood pressure, and so forth in real time. They collect 1,200 data points of vital signs a second of these premature babies. And then they do a big data analysis to uncover correlations. And they found a signature pattern that with great likelihood would predict the onset of an infection 24 hours before the first symptoms would manifest themselves. 24 additional hours to give medication and to save the premature babies' lives. It's a breakthrough. But it is also a classical big data application. It uses vastly more data than we used ever before. The findings were not exact, but messy because the data was messy. And they were correlations. They didn't answer why things were happening. They just answered what was happening. But that is good enough. So let's contrast small data age and big data age for a moment. In the small data age, we need to define the purpose of collecting the data and making sense of it from the outset, at the beginning. We need to have a concrete hypothesis. Every scientist needs to have a concrete hypothesis before they can go out and collect data, they're told. And because collecting data is so expensive and analyzing it is so hard, we have honed our statistical skills to gain most insight from the least amount of data. That means that we have to emphasize data quality and we imply causal connections. It basically means that small data confirms the known. Compare that to big data. where we can let the data speak. That is, we can let the data use the data's ability to create hypotheses. Google did not know which words would perfectly predict the spread of the flu. So they used an algorithm to create 500 million hypotheses, and then to find out of those 500 million hypotheses the best one. That is far more optimal than having a human being pick any one of the 500 million and say, this is the best one. We can embrace messiness. We can rely on correlations. The fundamental insight with big data is that we uncover the novel, the new. It's all based on datafication. That is our ability to put in data form ever more aspects of our reality. Start with location. 15 years ago, location in Bangkok was difficult to find. If you were in a car as a Westerner with a map on your lap, trying to find out where you were in real time, it was almost impossible. Today, I can fire up my smartphone, and my smartphone will perfectly fine tell me where I am. It is because location has been datafied. That is, our location has been put in data form and can easily be transferred over and then analyzed and calculated. But location is not the only area where we have datafied stuff. In 2012, IBM got a patent for the datafying floor. That is, it's a floor that knows what is standing on it. Human beings, other things. Think about the applications of this. Supermarkets would know how many people walk down a particular aisle, at what display of products people stand and look at. Or in a different context, in a societal context, we could use it for in the homes of old people. So when they fall and can't get up again, the floor would notice and would alert emergency services. In Japan, I'm delighted to tell our esteemed visitor from Waseda University, we have excellent research to datafy our backsides. It turns out that our backsides are as unique as our fingerprint. And you can measure the backside of each individual being. Now, why would you do that? Because this researcher is working with Japanese car companies to use this as an identification device to protect cars from theft. So you sit in your car, you don't need your key anymore, your car is recognizing your backside, and you can drive off. The thief gets in, sits down, the car recognizes it's a different backside, the car doesn't start. That's datafication. Or think of Google Glass. You've probably heard of Google Glass being able to superimpose on your vision some information. Now, this version cannot do what I am predicting the next generation of Google Glass will be able to do. The next generation of Google Glass will be able to track what we are looking at. And can you imagine how valuable it would be to datafy the human gaze so that we can see what kind of advertisement we're really looking at, what kind of shopping window we're really looking at, what kind of product we're really looking at. Can you also imagine what kind of worrying trends this might reveal? Because we would know what males are really looking at. It's datafication. It's rendering ever more aspects of reality into data form that can then be transformed into something else. Something else? It's value. Now, the core economic point of big data is that data's value is not exhausted by using it for the purpose it was collected originally. But data's value is the sum of all of the value that can be reaped by reusing the data over and over and over again for all kinds of different purposes. So think about a startup company in the United States called Decide.com. Decide.com monitors hundreds of websites, of large consumer product websites like eBay and Amazon every single second. And what Decide.com offers is, for hundreds of thousands of consumer goods, perfect prediction, or close to perfect prediction. What does that mean? If you want to buy a washing machine, and you know what kind of washing machine you want to buy, you plug it in, you type it in, and it tells you at which vendor you get the cheapest price for this washing machine. Well, we know that. That's comparison shopping. But then it will tell you whether you should buy it now or wait 24 hours or wait 48 hours, because that price is likely to go up or likely to go down. So precise is the prediction model of Decide.com that they guarantee that they're right. And if you make a decision to buy a washing machine or anything else based on a wrong prediction that they make, they will refund you the difference. Decide.com does not have any special insights into why the prices change. They do just a correlational analysis based on the price points from the internet that they have, and then make a prediction with great confidence. They understand what, not why. But they do this by reusing the data that already exists and is out there. They go to Amazon and take the price data down. They go to eBay and take the price data down. That's reusing existing data. Or take INRIX. INRIX is a company that has a smartphone application on Android and iPhones. And INRIX helps people, particularly commuters, to go from home to work and back every day, telling them what way to go to avoid traffic jams. So they have heat maps like this, telling you what kind of road has heavy traffic and what road has light traffic. We know these type of applications. But most of these applications are based on CCTV cameras or radio information. With INRIX, that's different. INRIX has real-time data. How do they get this real-time data? They have 100 million users every single working day around the world. 100 million. Every single user of INRIX is also a sensor. Because as you drive to work using your INRIX application, that application sends to INRIX how fast you're going and where you are. And that is then used to update this heat map in real time. But that's not all that INRIX does. INRIX now has a lot of data, billions of data points every single day. But now they have found out that that data has value. So it turns out that they can reuse the old data to find better correlations between road traffic and health of the local economies. Or they can, and they did, team up with a hedge fund, an investment fund, and use the data that they collect on weekend traffic around shopping malls in order to predict sales of the stores in the shopping mall, because the traffic around shopping mall correlates with revenues. And they use this info to buy or sell shares prior to the company's quarterly earning announcements. That's a reuse of data. That's valuable. Or think of German airline Lufthansa. Their airplanes use a lot of sensor data of temperature and humidity and air pressure in order to send that to the flight management system, the autopilot, to fly the plane. But until a few years ago, they threw that data away. Then they started capturing it on a USB stick or something similar to it. When the plane landed, they sent the data to Lufthansa headquarters, and then from there to the German Weather Forecast Institute. Just that data from 300 airplanes has improved German weather forecasts by 7%. It's a reuse of data that otherwise we would have thrown away. Now, who are the winners and losers? When you look at this, you might be tempted to say the winners are going to be Google, Facebook, Amazon, and some others. That's not true. Scale does not equal success in the big data age anymore. Conventionally, bigger companies have had scale advantages over small ones. But that is going to change. The very big data holders, like the Googles, continue to have advantages due to the size. But big data startup companies can now get cheap data storage and processing capabilities on demand, thanks to cloud services, and therefore can become successful without having scale. That is, without having huge server centers and so forth. They use cloud infrastructure. Remember the company Decide.com that I told you about? They have hundreds of thousands of consumer products that they can predict the prices. They collect billions of price points every day. They service hundreds of thousands of customers every day. Including the cleaning lady, they have less than 50 employees. And they have not a single server. They use pure cloud infrastructure for all of that. So more than money, what you need in the big data age, if you want to be a winner, is something that this guy has. This is the founder of Decide.com, Oren Etzioni, a professor of computer science at the University of Washington. He has the big data mindset. He understands that you can reuse the data to extract value from it. And so he puts it together. That is the key to opening up the latent value that data holds. Now let me get close to my finishing line here by saying something important with respect to economies and entire national economies. If data is important for economic success in the big data age, then we need to ask ourselves, what role do governments have in this age? In the past, governments would take a particular liking or interest in an economic sector. In the last couple of decades, it was usually innovative sectors like ICT or telecommunications. And they would try to stimulate innovation in sectors like that through monetary subsidies, giving money to these sectors. In the big data age, we may not need money to stimulate innovation in this big data sector, but we may need data to stimulate growth and innovation and new ideas. And the government has huge amounts of data. So it is perhaps the unique role of the government to make available some of the data to these innovative startup companies in the big data field so that they can begin to have great ideas and put them to work. Data can become a subsidy. And the huge advantage of that subsidy is that it does not cost money. Thank you very much.